Hello and welcome to the JSA studio, where we try to stay away from hot takes and deliver actual content. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to be covering the weekend that was. I'm going to be talking about the two games that stood out the most to me, as well as one team that disappointed and another team that exceeded my expectations. But before we get into all of that, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to like and subscribe if you enjoy seeing actual content, and remind you to leave a comment. Let's just keep it civil down there in the comment section. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into our first topic, Colorado versus TCU. Now, it wasn't shocking to me that Colorado ended up winning this game. I didn't particularly like TCU a whole lot, and I thought Colorado was going to be much better than people were expecting them to be. And I believe in Deion Sanders. I think he is quite possibly the best player-coach combo since Mike Ditka. I think he and Mike Ditka are really the only two examples that I can think of a player having a Hall of Fame caliber playing career and then going on to be a very good coach as well. I mean, I truly believe that Colorado will become a force to be reckoned with while Deion Sanders is their head coach, assuming he doesn't leave for another job at some point in the future. With that being said, we need to pump the brakes on Colorado this year a little bit. The defense is horrible. I don't think TCU's offense is all that good. I think they're probably better than average, but I don't think they're a good offense. And they picked the defense apart. Now, I think the offense is elite, and the offense is why you're going to win 7, 8, 9 games this year. I think 9-3 is on the table for Colorado this year, assuming all of their 50-50 games go their way. But when it comes down to it, I don't think this team has the defensive talent and the defensive acumen to really compete in the Pac-12 or at the national scale this year. I think it's a little bit two-folded. I think Colorado is much better than people were expecting them to be, and I think TCU is much worse than people were expecting them to be, and I've been saying that pretty consistently. It's honestly been one of my better takes this year. I've had plenty of awful takes too. I mean, I think I had Michigan number 5 in my initial rankings, and that was a bad take. But specifically for Colorado, what did this game mean? Well, number one, even though I already viewed them as legitimate and viewed Deion Sanders as a potentially top 10 coach in college football, this win against a playoff team last year did legitimize the program and legitimize what Deion Sanders is doing, in spite of him going on a little 2-year-old toddler temper tantrum after the game against the media. Second point, Travis Hunter is the best football player I have ever seen. Full stop. Now, I'm a Michigan fan, okay? I was born in 1997 while Michigan and Michigan State were playing each other, okay? In Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan Hospital. Michigan is in my blood. Can we please stop acting like Charles Woodson is even a fair comparison to what Travis Hunter is doing? Charles Woodson, in 11 games in 1997, had 11 catches for 231 yards and 2 touchdowns. Travis Hunter is going to surpass those numbers this week against Nebraska, while also being an elite caliber corner. We have never seen anything like this in the history of college football. This man could legitimately contend for the Belindikoff, the Paul Hornung, the Heisman, and the Jim Thrope Award, and also the Walter Camp Award. I forgot about the Walter Camp like everybody else does. Until I saw him play against TCU, I never thought anybody could legitimately say somebody's going to win the Heisman twice. In my Heisman video, I included Caleb Williams in the section that said he's not going to win it, because he's not going to win the Heisman, because nobody wins the Heisman twice. Travis Hunter might win the Heisman twice. This guy is a top 10 pick as a wide receiver, and maybe I'm blowing this out of proportion a little bit based off of one game of film against a pretty bad defense, but he is the type of athlete that can turn into a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL and a top 5 corner in the NFL. And if I'm drafting him 2 years from now, I'm going to play him both ways. He's clearly shown that he has the conditioning to be able to play 120 snaps every game and still be able to go 100% at the end of the game. As a wide receiver, he'll probably end up as a top 10 pick. As a corner, he's probably going to end up as a top 10 pick. You add those two things together, he might go with the first pick of the draft in what I don't particularly think is going to be an awful quarterback class. But if some team with a rookie quarterback in 2025 ends up with the first pick of the draft, I'm taking Travis Hunter all day, every day. And short of 5 first-round picks and multiple other day 2 picks, I'm not trading that pick for shit. As a corner, he has tremendous hands and incredible instincts. As a wide receiver, he's great with the ball in his hands, and maybe the single most impressive thing about him, in my opinion, is that he runs routes using his athleticism, which is not something you see a whole lot of college wide receivers being able to do. In fact, I can think of maybe only one guy off the top of my head that I can think of that really utilized his athleticism when he was running routes in college, and that was Justin Jefferson. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by utilizing his athleticism to run routes? Well, when you reach a certain level of mastery with your technique and you can do it without thinking about it, that's when you can start adding your little athletic flourishes into it. And I will say this, Travis Hunter does have some technical stuff that he'll need to improve on as a route runner, but he's already adding those little athletic flourishes that probably only he can do to his game. So he's like 3 or 4 years ahead of even draft eligible wide receivers. As a corner, he's at his best in zone coverage when he can look at the quarterback and feel the route that the wide receiver is running just off of instinct. He had one interception, which was one of the best plays I've ever seen a corner make. And I'll talk you through that in a minute. But he also dropped 2 other interceptions in this game. So he was making all kinds of plays throughout the entire game on offense and defense. He had a pass breakup in the end zone where he had to dive at a wide receiver to get his hand on the ball and knock it out as he was going to the ground. It was an incredible performance. But that interception in the goal line was the cherry on top of the sundae. It was a spectacular play. They were playing zone coverage, Colorado was, and TCU had 2 wide receivers to the right and the running back to the right of the quarterback. 2 wide receivers were going to run slants. They're just clear out routes. And the running back is just going to run straight to the flat, catch the ball, and walk into the touchdown against any other corner, maybe in the country. He sees the slant action and goes with him. He's right on his hip. Then he looks at the quarterback and see that he's going to throw the ball to the running back. The second the ball leaves the quarterback's hand, Travis Hunter is moving towards the running back, and he has to dive to make the play, and he comes up with the catch, and it's unbelievable. The route recognition, the intelligence, and the athleticism were all on display on that play. It was so incredible that Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt were momentarily left speechless, and those are 2 of the best in the business. However, Travis Hunter was not the only really impressive player for Colorado. Edwards, the running back, who I believe is a true freshman, was phenomenal, especially catching the ball out of the backfield where he did most of his damage. But he also sneakily went 6 for 24 in the run game and adding a touchdown to go with his 3 receiving touchdowns. So I think he could run the ball for them and be effective if needed. But this game, it was a shootout. They needed to throw the ball. Not that big of a deal. And Shader Sanders entered the season as a guy I was kind of looking at as like, okay, I like the film. I think he's athletic enough. I don't think he's going to be someone that you're going to draw plays for. I think his arm is good enough, but I think his brains and his intelligence are all on display. He reads the field very well, and he just picks defenses apart. He entered the season as kind of a fringe first-round quarterback prospect for me. I believe I had a top 40 grade on him just heading into the season, just to have like an initial grade as like a starting point. And he is firmly in the conversation for QB3 right now. I don't think he's not going to pass Drake May. He's not going to pass Caleb Williams, but he is firmly in the discussion for QB3, along with, J.J. McCarthy, Joe Milton, Spencer Rattler, and Michael Penix as well. I think those are the group of guys that are in the conversation for QB3 this upcoming year. And if I'm being entirely honest with you, at the end of the season, I might recommend Shader Sanders to go back to college because he's still going to be able to get paid. He'll probably make more in that year through NIL than he would on a rookie contract anyway. And he'll be unquestionably the guy in that quarterback class. Drew Aller looked good as well, but the 2025 QB class, even though the sophomores right now, Sanders would be head and shoulders above all of them. But what about the other side of the coin? What about TCU? Well, the offense still looked good. It looked competent. It looked like it was going to be at least effective this season. The run game looked good as well, but Morris missed some passes and threw some bad passes. Like I said earlier with talking about Travis Hunter, he dropped another 2 interceptions, and there was at least another one more throw after that probably could have or should have been an interception as well. So he did not play great, but this was still a close game. So if he plays good, if he plays like Max Duggan played last year, I think you probably win this game. If he doesn't throw those 2 interceptions, specifically the one to Travis Hunter on the goal line, which I don't really blame him for because that was just an incredible play by Travis Hunter. But even if he just kind of sees Travis Hunter and throws that ball in the dirt, just out of luck or noticing that it's going to be picked off, so he just kind of airmails the ball or something like that, then you're at least going to kick a field goal. And then it's a tie game at the end of the game, where you're not trying to tie the game, you're trying to kick a field goal. So you just got to get in the field goal range to tie the game and live to see another drive potentially. That changes the dynamic of this whole game. If it was a touchdown, then you're running the clock out on that last drive. So it just goes to show you how little separates winning and losing sometimes. But the biggest takeaway for me is that Amani Bailey looked really good. He probably should be your running back 1 heading forward, not Trey Sanders, in my opinion. Trey Sanders had the touchdowns, but, whatever. Bailey was the much better running back, in my opinion. So I would like to see him get the bulk of the carries moving forward. I will say this about TCU. I did slightly have a concern that the offense being good might have been because of Garrett Riley and not Sonny Dykes. Those concerns have been pretty much fully alleviated at this point. I think the offense, as long as Sonny Dykes is the head coach, is going to be good. So you've got that going for you. I just don't think you're going to be the type of program where you have a really good year and then you could come back the next year and just reload. Next on the docket is Florida State versus LSU. And what a statement by Florida State. They came out and utterly dominated in the second half. They blew LSU out of the water. It was, to an extent, a tale of 2 halves. LSU left a lot of points on the table because of poor decision-making from the head coach and, honestly, subpar offensive play calling a lot of the time, especially in the red zone. So what do you take from this game if you're Florida State? Well, the first thing that you take from this game is that Keon Coleman, not Johnny Wilson, is your number 1 wide receiver. Johnny Wilson's phenomenal. If he can figure out how to catch the ball consistently, he'd be a top 10 pick in the draft. But Keon Coleman is special. Even if Johnny Wilson could catch the ball, I'm still not sure he would be a better wide receiver than Keon Coleman. You do not see wide receivers with his size that run as fast as he does, that move as well as he does, and can go and get jump balls like he can go and get them. He's got special ability when it comes to jump balls and just going and getting it. He is undeniably wide receiver 2 at this point of the season for me, for this upcoming draft class. I don't particularly think he's going to surpass Marvin Harrison Jr., but I don't think that's an impossible hill to climb. I don't think Marvin Harrison is this generational wide receiver prospect. I think if you're looking at wide receiver prospects from the past 10 years or so, I think I was probably higher on A.J. Brown. I was definitely higher on Justin Jefferson. And I think he's in the same tier as Jamar Chase and Jamison Williams for me. But Corey Coleman might end up right up there with him because he's also 6'4", and very athletic, and he's also got a better frame than Marvin Harrison Jr. So Keon Coleman could potentially, at least for me, push for wide receiver one. I doubt he's going to get there, but I don't think it's out of the question. Another takeaway that I'm going to talk about here is Florida State's offensive line is really, really good. Genuinely a top 10, maybe even top 5 unit in all of college football. Jordan Travis was not sacked. Now, there were a couple times where he had to do some running around, but all in all, the offensive line played really, really well and held their own against a talented defensive line from LSU. Now, Harold Perkins not being an edge rusher was pure idiocy, and we'll talk about that when we get to LSU in a minute. But I thought the offensive line, especially in the second half, in the first half, the interior got beat up a little bit, but you made some adjustments, came out, and in the second half was great. Jordan Travis is the last thing I'm going to talk about here with Florida State. He played very good. I think Jordan Travis, as an NFL prospect, leaves a lot to be desired, but as a quarterback in college, with the scheme that they're running, you can absolutely win a national championship with him as your quarterback. And it's too early to say, but I did have him on my Heisman contenders list along with Jaden Daniels, but that's probably out the window now. But I think he could potentially contend for the Heisman. I think the Heisman is likely Travis Hunter's award to lose. It would take him being genuinely not good on either side of the ball for like 2 or 3 games in order for him to not win the award, in my opinion. But storylines often trump who is the actual best player. So if the Florida State storyline can continue to be entertaining and continue to be good, Jordan Travis might end up winning the Heisman Trophy. And on the other side of the coin here, LSU. What is left for LSU this season? Well, everything is still on the table. I still think Brian Kelly is a very, very good football coach. And I still think if you put Harold Perkins back on the edge, that this defense can play at a very, very high level. And now you don't have a margin for error. I think you're going to come into every week like it's do or die. You only really have, in my opinion, one more game on the schedule, and that's against Alabama in Tuscaloosa. If you can win that game, nobody's going to remember that you lost to Florida State at the end of the season, because Brian Kelly has bested Nick Saban twice, and that's going to propel you right back to be like the favorites, maybe even over Georgia, to win the SEC. So you still got plenty to look forward to. I still think Jaden Daniels is a really good quarterback. I think you have some problems play calling that you're going to need to iron out as the season goes on. The offensive line is a question mark. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's good either. I'm not sure you're going to be able to run the ball consistently, but this is still a very, very, very good football team that I think could potentially run the slate to the SEC championship game. Next, we're going to talk about a team that disappointed, and that's Ohio State. You may see the text on the screen which says y'all need to chill and think maybe I'm higher on them still than other people are, or I don't think they were as bad as other people believe that they were. No, I think they were bad. I have some serious questions about the defense because there were yards to be gained that Indiana was too inept to be able to take advantage of, and the offense was horrible. What y'all need to chill about is Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord played well. He didn't play bad at all. He played good. Maybe even better than an average quarterback might play, given the other circumstances of this team. Where you seriously need to be concerned, if you're an Ohio State fan, is this offensive line looks abysmal. Donovan Jackson, who I thought might push his way into the first round this year, looked absolutely horrible. Josh Simmons at left tackle looked like a liability. And really, it was just Josh Fryer at right tackle who played well. Everybody else was varying degrees of bad. They couldn't run block. They couldn't pass block. Kyle McCord had no time. You saw wide receivers get open down the field. Kyle McCord didn't have time to throw the football, so he was throwing these little dink and dunk passes, and it didn't work out in the way that you would hope that it would work out because they only put up 23 points. My main takeaway was that Kyle McCord is not the problem with this team because the offensive line is terrible. Or at least based off of one game against what I think is a bad Indiana defense, they look horrible. Maybe Indiana's defense is better than I thought it was. Either way, That defense is not going to hold a candle to Notre Dame. It's not going to hold a candle to Michigan, and it's not going to hold a candle to Penn State. Wisconsin might give you troubles on the defensive side of the ball. Minnesota's defense is elite. And you've got that game after Michigan State and before Michigan. That is a sneaky game now. I didn't think there was a scenario where you could possibly lose that game, but I am overreacting. I'm not going to act like I'm not. But I'm overreacting after one game about this offensive line and its ineptitude. Minnesota's defense is borderline elite. Their offense is inept, but their defense is borderline elite. That becomes a trap game now. And heading into this season, I did not believe that that was going to be the case. But there is a way to fix all of this. The way that you deal with a bad or subpar offensive line when you have a good quarterback, and I think you do, and you have a great receiving core, which you do have, is you spread the defense out and you work the quick game. Go out of the shotgun and let the running backs be special, like I think the running backs are special. And then when you can establish the run game, the defense is going to be less pinning their ears back against the pass, and you can use your running back to help at the left tackle position. There are things that you can do to help the offensive line. But the problem with working the quick game, or at least what the problem with working the quick game for you guys would be, is you don't have wide receivers that make plays with the ball in their hands. You have route runners and possession receivers. You don't really have a guy that can take a screen to the house. So even if you work the quick game, it's going to have to be, matriculating the ball down the field, as opposed to what Colorado could do, which is dump the ball off and then have the running back take it to the house. So Ryan Day is going to have his work cut out for him in terms of figuring out ways to still have an explosive and good offense with an abysmal offensive line. There are ways to do it, and he's a good enough coach to be able to do it, but you may not have the personnel in order for a scheme like that to really succeed and excel and to keep you in the national conversation, in like the national championship conversation. You came into this year as my number 2 team in the country, and the only reason you weren't number 1 for me was because Georgia had just won back-to-back national championships. But I was more confident in Ohio State being able to be a national champion than I was Georgia. And that confidence is now all gone. And it's going to take 2 dominant performances against teams that damn well might be better than Indiana and Youngstown State and Western Kentucky in order for me to get back on the bandwagon, at least for Notre Dame game. Notre Dame is shaping up to be a tremendously bad matchup for you. And a lot of these other games suddenly do become question marks a little bit. Maryland always plays you guys tough. Purdue, I don't think, is a bad football team. Penn State, you do get Penn State at home, but then the next week, even if you manage to win that game, I already had Wisconsin pulling the upset against you. I'm more confident in that happening than I was before the season, and I was already fairly confident because I just thought Luke Fickell was going to have that team ready to go. But now you have actual flaws to exploit, which I didn't think you had heading into the season. And I think maybe some of my reaction is based on the fact that I was so high on this team heading into the season. Like, I thought there was a decent chance that you could have 16 or 17 players drafted into the NFL. And that wasn't even considering, like, maybe someone on the offensive line could step up and get drafted. Like, Donovan Jackson was the only guy that I was factoring into that discussion along the offensive line. And I was also maybe in the back of my mind thinking you can maybe get another 1 or 2 guys drafted off of that offensive line, because the guys that were contending were all draft eligible. I was so high on this team coming into this season, and I'm not now. I don't know where you're going to rank on my top 25 this week. I haven't really thought about that quite yet, but it's not going to be number 2. Moving on from a team that struggled, I want to really quickly talk about Washington and how impressed I was with their performance this week. They dominated what I think is the best team in the Mountain West, and a team that might end the season as a top 25 team for me, and that's Boise State. And they dominated them. They made them look like Indiana. I wasn't high on Washington heading into the year. I had them like firmly in 4th place on my Pac-12 rankings behind USC, Oregon, and Utah. Now I have them number 1. And I don't particularly think it's close because they played defense. And Oregon, I don't know anything about Oregon. Oregon might end up being the best team in the Pac-12. But USC, through 2 games, has not been able to play defense. And I think Washington can, because they looked better against Boise than USC has in their first 2 games of the season, playing against worse teams. I think Michael Penix has firmly placed himself into the quarterback 3 discussion, as well as Jace McMillan into the legitimate, like, first round top 20 pick sort of wide receiver discussion. He might be wide receiver 3 for me right now. He was very impressive. I thought he outplayed Dunze during this game, and I'm very high on Rome Dunze. I came into here this season as a top 40 grade, and I really like him too. So Jace McMillan, really good. Odunze, really good. Washington, really good. Last thing that we're going to talk about in this video here real quick are QBs from around the country that aren't named Caleb Williams or Drake May, and how utterly impressive a lot of them were. The 3 that I have on the screen, Spencer Rattler, Michael Penix, and Shader Sanders, were the 3 that were very impressive to me. I've already kind of talked about Michael Penix and Shader Sanders a whole lot, so I'm going to first, to start off here, talk about Spencer Rattler and how impressive he was to me against North Carolina. The fact of the matter is that he was under duress all game long. He got sacked 9 times, and he played out of his mind. I think he was 30 for 39, and he was the sole reason South Carolina was in that football game at all. And it was all done without his best wide receiver, who got hurt early in the first quarter. I've mentioned several times throughout this video that quarterbacks have put themselves into the QB3 discussion. Right now, QB3 for me is Spencer Rattler. Some other quarterbacks that I do have some quick thoughts on: Sam Hartman has looked calm and collected and played very efficient for Notre Dame so far. They finally have a legitimate passing attack, which is something that they really haven't had in a very, very long time. I can't really think of a time in my lifetime, at least, that Notre Dame has had a legitimate, for real passing offense. And they have that now. Joe Milton is another guy that impressed somewhat. He did have a walk-in touchdown dropped by his wide receiver. However, ironically, on that play as well, Joe Milton, who has the strongest arm I've ever seen, underthrew the wide receiver. I think he took off a little bit too much on that play, but the wide receiver still should have caught it, and it still probably should have been a touchdown. But he looked good throughout that whole game, not just sporadically or anything. He looked fairly consistent to me. And if you're a NFL draft fan like I am, and didn't particularly enjoy the discussion surrounding Anthony Richardson last year and how kind of toxic that was, you better buckle up, because Joe Milton is gonna be a whole goddamn ordeal. DJ Uiagalelei, the quarterback for Oregon State, formerly of Clemson, also looked good. I didn't particularly think he played bad at Clemson. I thought most of the issues this past season, 2 years ago, 2021, yeah, that was on him. But this past season, I thought he actually played decently well for Clemson. But the play calling and just schematically, the offense was rough for Clemson last year. I don't think it's going to be this year with Garrett Riley now. But I didn't particularly think Uiagalelei was the problem. And he looked good for Oregon State. And he kind of brings this gravitas to that program. Like, this was the #1 recruit in the country, if I'm not mistaken. 5-star dude, big-time athlete, and big-time player. And now he's at Oregon State balling. That is going to be one of my top storylines for the entire college football season, is A, how Oregon State plays, and if they can actually compete in the Pac-12, and B, how DJ Uiagalelei plays. Quinn Ewers at Texas, started off a little bit slow, got some things figured out in the second half. Not that concerned. We're going to find out if he's going to be real or not against Alabama this week. So this week, the fact that he struggled, we all know they're looking forward. They're talking about, like, no, we're not looking for. Yes, you are. You're not giving 100% to this week when you have maybe the matchup of the college football season to look forward to this upcoming weekend. A little bit out of left field, but that the night game the other day was UCLA, and Dante Moore came in, and I thought that he looked pretty good in terms of raw athleticism and arm strength and stuff like that. He looked like a guy who was gonna be a dude, but right now isn't ready. So I'm not particularly sure he should have been playing. Like, they were doing this weird QB rotation, and that's never a good idea. It's never once in the history of football worked out at any level. Either tell Dante that he's not ready to play and sit his ass on the bench, or just let the youngin go out there and sling it. If he makes some mistakes, he makes some mistake. I generally tend to lean towards letting the youngin play and just letting him go out there and sling it, and whatever happens, happens. I don't think Chip Kelly is on the hot seat. I think he's going to be at UCLA for the long haul, so I don't think he needs to worry about like his job or whatever. So you might as well let the top 10 prospect 5-star QB go out there and play. So these are takes that are on the edge of my mind as I go into next week, and that's UNC as a team. I'm not sure how much of that was them being good and how much of that was South Carolina's offensive line being really bad. Alabama and Texas. Alabama looked really good. They were playing Middle Tennessee State. I expect you to look really good against them. Texas looked kind of sluggish in the first half, but then kind of figured some things out in the second half. Don't really know what they are quite yet. We're going to find out when they play each other this weekend. Drew Aller and Penn State didn't get to watch that game, chose to watch other games. I'm definitely going to make it a point to watch Penn State this upcoming week so that I can have a take about that next week. Notre Dame, I don't really know a whole lot about them. I think the offensive line is good. I think the defensive line is good. But it's all just kind of up in the air until this weekend where you actually play what I think is a good team in NC State. So that'll be very interesting. DJ Uyunglele and Oregon State kind of already gave you my takes about them in the last segment, but not really in depth yet. Don't really know a whole lot about that team. We do have a direct comparison between them and USC with a San Jose State team that I actually don't think is all that bad. That might be a team that can get to a bowl game. And Oklahoma, obviously scoring that many points is going to be very impressive. But what was more impressive to me was the fact that in the highlights that I watched, the defense didn't look utterly incompetent like it did last year. Like last year, they were making like 6th grade football mistakes. Like they didn't know how to tackle people last year. This year, they seem much more fundamentally sound, and the offense looks like it could also be really, really good, potentially even elite. But I haven't really had the opportunity to look at them in depth in any manner, so it's not a real in-depth take quite yet. Up next, we're going to break down J.J. McCarthy and how he did against ECU and why it was very impressive to me. I did not come in particularly high on J.J. McCarthy. I thought that he would take some steps forward and potentially be really, really good, but I've seen more out of him than even I expected to see out of improvement, but that's just me, and what do I know? I am just some asshole on the internet talking about football. If you watched all the way to this point, thank you, and please consider subscribing. That's all that I have for today, so I'll see you next time.